All right, once you've finished cutting out your photo of yourself or whatever photo you're working with, make sure you do a quick look one more time just to make sure we got everything selected. So for example, if I look at this, it looks good at the first pass, but as I zoom in here, I can see that I forgot to cut out the part around the trigger here. So I'm gonna hit the letter P. I'm gonna click and drag just to do a quick little selection here to grab what I forgot to select here. And I'm going to add to that selection down here. There's a couple more spots where I forgot to cut out the background. Now nobody probably would have noticed this one because it's the same color gray as the stock here. It would be a minimal mistake, but I would know, and I like to make sure that I do things as close to perfect as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up real quick. And now you've noticed I've got multiple paths going on here. If I look at my path, it's all under the same work path layer. So what I can do is command click, and now it selects that section as well as these down here. With those selected, I'll make sure I'm on the right layer, and I'll just hit the delete key to delete those pixels. I'll hit command D to deselect. And now when I zoom out, I see that looks pretty good. And I think I got everything else. Let me look through the suspenders here. You know, nobody probably noticed this one at all, but I could come in here and clean that up just to make sure that there's nowhere in this photo that accidentally sticks out. That time I just hit command return and it made my selection. I'm on this layer, I'll hit the delete key and now deselect my selection there. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm confident that no matter what background I put this on, it's gonna look good. And one way to tell before you actually put it into a scene, I can hit command and click on the new layer icon to put a new layer below it. And I'm just going to click up here in my color swatch area, and let's do a bright color, pretty obnoxious green. Make sure that layer selected, and now since I selected that, it's my foreground color. So to fill with foreground, it's Alt Delete, or come up here to Edit Fill and choose that foreground color as an option. Okay, so now I've got that green fill. So now I can come back through one more time and just kind of make sure that the selection's looking good for the most part. You know, everything's looking pretty good here. I don't see anything that I've forgotten. Oh, you know what? There's a couple things right there. And this, again, this would probably not matter. And this is where you can spend all day long. So you really have to choose how precise do you want to make your selections. But that shoelace there, command return. Now, if I hit delete right now, I would just be deleting from the green layer. I want to make sure that I've selected the layer with my photo. I'll hit delete. And now just what's within that selection gets deleted. Same thing over here on this part of the shoe. I can come through, highlight that. And again, honestly, like this is the way it went to press. These little shoelace things here, if we looked at that original poster I showed you, you wouldn't even notice because the feet are on the ground and it's dark and nobody's going to see that. But again, you want to get in the habit of doing as good of a job as you can, right? You want to make a mistake and have it be an expensive mistake where somebody has to reprint something because they did notice. So, all right, now that we've got that selected, let's work on a couple techniques here to help blend this into the background. Well, for starters, let's look at the edges here. Because we use that pen tool method, this edge is super crisp and super hard. Now, that's fine, but in reality, it's not going to be a crisp image. It's going to have a little bit of a blur to it. So there's a lot of ways we can do this. Like I've said before, in Photoshop, there's 100 ways to do the same thing. One of which, if I command click on this thumbnail here, I get my selection back. I can hit the letter M to get my Marching Ants marquee tool, rectangular marquee tool. And with that selected, up here I've got this Refine Edge button. I'll click on that once. My view mode, I'll change this to, it's kind of tough to see, so I'll put it on black. I can see the edges better here. I'll click out. And now I can smooth the edges here, and it's kind of tough to see, but you can see that green bleeding through from behind. So it's smoothing out those edges, and you can feather the edges too. Excuse me. And by feathering out the images, the edges here, you can see that my selection is going to be pretty soft and blurry. I can also shift the edge in a little bit, maybe change my feather a little bit. So you can really work with that edge. If I hit OK, it's going to combine that back to a selection. So if I hit Command J, I can jump cut that new one to a layer in front. I'll turn off the eyeball here. And now when I zoom in, it went from having a very crisp, hard edge to now kind of a blurred edge, which Depending on where you're working, that might be great. But in other aspects or in other areas, it might be too much. It might cut in more than I wanted it to. So that's where you're going to need to play with it a little bit. I'm going to turn that off. Actually, let's zoom in real quick. I'll turn on the layer below it, and you can see how much crisper that edge is, especially right here. Okay, so another way to work, and this is the way that I typically work, I will grab my blur tool. So over here on the menu bar on the left, kind of midway down, I've got the blur tool. I'll set my strength pretty high, maybe 85, and then I'll just paint over the edges, just the edges, not in further than just the edges, because then I can control what blurs and what doesn't. So what I'm trying to do is just soften up these edges a little bit to help blend it in with the background. And so I can control how much gets applied. And sometimes it just needs a little bit just to sell the deal. And now here's another thing. As humans, right, we're a little more organic, so we're going to have a little bit more of a softer edge than hard metals and machinery type things. So look in nature, look at real life, and just get an idea for what should be crisp, like this rifle image here, the buttstock, versus like his clothing. His clothing is going to have a softer feel to it. So go through your edges of the photo you just did and use this blur tool and kind of soften up those images, those edges to help really convince that this selection belongs in the new background. So go ahead, take your time, go through and just brush up on the edges. So I've got my blur tool selected. I'm just clicking and dragging over the edge here. Make sure you've got that one layer selected, because here's the deal. If I'm selected the layer below it and I'm painting, you're not going to see any difference or anything happening because you're actually targeting that layer below. So make sure you've got the right layer selected and then soften up those edges again. And you can take as much time as you needed to, but just do enough to really seal the effect. And once you get that done, we'll go ahead and dive into the next video.